I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna land that we stand on and the people that have always looked after it and continue to do so. It's a beautiful place to live, and so it's nice to welcome you guys here as well. It's nice to think of you shooting here, and it's also really unusual to have 3 directors sitting in the room. You know, like we don't always get to talk to other directors. It's something that you know, you spend a lot of time on. I mean, you guys spend more time on other people's sets, so you get to see more of that. But for me, it's a rare treat to really.
But you become aware, obviously, when you become a director, you become aware of just how tiny that window is for actors. Actually, like you'll get to see the on-set conduct, and you'll get to see the manifestation of things. You might sit and you'll see the end result at some point, but so much of what you actually do as a director is buried way in the background, and you want it to be imperceptible. All that stuff that goes into the structure of how the film itself is set up and coordinated and run. Yeah.
It's true. Like, you're always trying to do everything you can to seem really relaxed in the moment, I think, or to be really relaxed in the moment and present. But we will get to the film, but I do want to just talk about a few things in general about your careers and how you work. And one of the big questions I have is, how do you choose what you put your time to? Whether that is as an actor or as a writer-director. And, you know, we have such a limited time, really. How do you make the decisions?
I used to be less discerning about that. And I guess, you know, early in the life of being an actor, you sort of have to be, or you maybe could choose to be less discerning about, because you're really looking for any opportunity. And for me, anyway, I'll talk to my experience as I've gotten older and those opportunities have become more available or more abundant. You have then the opportunity to be discerning in a different way, which is what would I like to do? What challenges for me am I looking for? And even like looking at the last 8 months, I think that's even become more acute for me, because I've had the forced time to think, all right, well, now that if we get the opportunity to make things again, what do I really, really want to do? Because it's sharpened that intention. And on a filmmaking or a producing level, I think those decisions are even more important, because, you know, for example, watching the amount of time that someone has to put into making a film. Acting is about dropping in, like doing a little mission as a soldier. You get to come in and do the thing and run off to the next thing. Being a director is about really like hunkering down with a real intention for a block of time that could be years.
What made you choose the films that you've chosen to direct then?
I was always looking initially for a film to direct that I felt was manageable, to be honest. I'd written other things and I thought they were too overwhelming for me to approach as a director first time. You know, because looking at a short film is different from looking at trying to tell a story over a longer period of time. When I wrote The Gift, it felt not just because it was manageable. I cared enough about the story and I could imagine the story, but I felt if I was going to start to dive into that world of making a longer narrative feature, that was manageable and exciting to me. And then after that, I started to grow in a little bit of confidence. You know, I've only made one other film since. But on a story level, whether I'm directing them or trying to help produce them, it really is about what you wake up in the morning thinking about. And if that's undeniable, then that years-long venture is worth undertaking for me.
Someone who's like not necessarily very known for esoteric statements is Kubrick, and he said it's just like falling in love. It's just like you fall in love with somebody for some reason, and the same thing happens with stories, and it's kind of quite alchemical. It can be quite a bizarre thing that attracts you. It could be a long-held feeling that kind of like gravitates like a magnet, or it could be something that comes completely out of nowhere and surprises you and surprises you with the fact that you might have some perspective on it that you feel could be worth sharing. It was very different for me with my first feature because I just crashed so headlong into it because I hadn't made shorts. I hadn't directed anything. When I walked on set to direct Acute Misfortune, that first day was my first day of directing film. So, I was just completely in the deep end, and like people would say to me, you have 7 days in the grade at the end, and I'd say, great, what's the grade? I mean, I kind of conceptually would know what the grade was, but yeah, it is a strange kind of alchemical thing that's going to attract you to things. I think when it comes to Australia, I feel like there are particular stories that I feel when you're working here, it's very different to working in the States. There's somehow a different agenda. There, you're very much an outsider, and the value of your perspective is of an outsider. You're looking at this place with a slightly different pair of eyes. I find that it inevitably gets political, whatever you're doing over there. It really is anywhere. But coming back to Australia, for me, like as an actor, I'd say, whether or not I did good work in the film or whatever it came to, but just being a part of Sweet Country is the type of thing that I would want to, continue doing as an actor. Was the journey of what we were doing as filmmakers. And for anybody who knows the film, it's a very dark film. And somebody said to me once, like, it must have been so terrible making that, all the violence in that film and the hateful attitudes. And it's like, yeah, but we're doing the opposite. We're doing the opposite of what that film was about. We had a great Indigenous director, a great Indigenous team. We were out there in a really different environment, submitting to the fact that this is not our place, flying in from Melbourne or Sydney or wherever and exploring that place. So as an actor, that's the type of thing that I'm drawn to. It's a whole experience,
I'm really interested in your, like, having stepped, onto the set of Acute Misfortune without having directed before. I mean, you directed theatre, so you had a pretty strong grounding of that sort of thing. But did you find, in terms of creating that process, that there were people that worked with you to give you some sense of process, or did you just come up with it?
I have to listen to everybody. You have to listen. That's the hardest thing, isn't it? About like directing is like so many of the skills that you need are sometimes completely contradictory. Like you need to know when not to hear anybody, and then you need to know when to listen to everyone, and you need to be able to not be proud. You need to be able to default to the best solution. If the person doing the photocopying has the best solution for a scene, then that's exactly what should be happening. So when it came to me, all these specialists and all those technicians and all those people who actually make up the film industry and actually make up filmmaking, like the gaffers and the grips and the colorists and that sort of thing, for me, the answer became, I just tried to engage them in the film. I just tried to get them really engaged with the ideas that the film was talking about, and then get them to talk about how they felt about those ideas. And then suddenly their work really started to come to life, and kind of let them lead their part of the process and tell me what I
totally agree with what Thomas is saying. I think filmmakers is a lot of hopefully very talented people who know what they're doing, getting together to push a vision forward and bring it to life. And I personally think that the best thing you can do is try and get the right people for the job, the best people, and not entirely stay out of their way, but stay out of their way enough that they can collaborate with you and not presume to do everybody's job. And I think coming at filmmaking for the first time, even if you've been on many, many sets like I had and like Thomas had, it still doesn't prepare you for that experience of being the captain of the ship.
But you've seen people afraid, and you've seen them cling. And when you watch someone cling, you go, now we're in trouble. And so I think having that perspective of being an actor, and certainly coming from theatre, and the distinct advantage of coming from theatre is that you're telling 90-minute stories from the time you're 18, 19, 20 years old. You're not telling 4-minute stories or making 2-minute commercials. That can only teach you so much when you're trying to tell a 90-minute story.
How do you know in those moments when to just go, no, everyone else is saying this, but I think I've got to stick true to something else? Like, how do you hold on to the essence of something?
For me personally, I think you have to have asked yourself every single possible question about what the story is, what it's about, why it's important to you, what you're trying to say with it. And as an actor, I always got nervous if a director couldn't answer those questions. So coming at filmmaking, approaching making my own film, I knew I had to be so thoroughly filled up with the information that was crucial.
But it's funny, isn't it? Because we had a really big scene 2 nights ago where you walked in and I said, I don't know what to do here. but it's a different type of not knowing what to do, isn't it? It's like we know what we want. Is you're not genuinely lost and befuddled and stressed. You're just going, we need to open ourselves up to the moment. We need to sort of surrender to what's going on now. We have principles that are guiding us about where we want to get to with this. And then something happened with you, and I could see something was happening with you, and then I geared the whole way we were going to shoot it around what was going on for you. It became a different way of rolling the camera. It became a different way of dealing with the set, making sure that the whole crew went silent and stepped back, and it radiated down the chain of ADs about keep everybody back, go away. And we didn't cut for almost a card. We just rolled.
But that was also,
yielded
I think,
something.
You know, that speaks, I think, to the fact that we, you know, something else that I find very important is the notion of freedom versus having a plan. And that often by having a plan and having parameters or knowing what the destination is, there's a certain freedom in the getting there. And in opposition to just complete unknowing and freedom, because then you don't really have a guide. So, you know, whether it's for me about having a shot list, but then throwing it out, knowing that if I need to, I can go back to it. At least there's an anchor of some kind. And that felt to me like that's what that day was.
And it's all preparation, isn't it? It's preparation and preparation and preparation, trying to deal with everything so that in the moment you can let go and you can introduce a little bit of chaos. It's like tension and release, isn't it? Because if you don't have all those things stacked up, if you don't have the right elements, if you're not in the right location with the right camera equipment, or that work's all been done just to get you to that moment. Where you're going to have to discover something that's going to happen and hopefully be astute enough and have enough coping mechanisms and all that sort of stuff on your belt. Because the thing about being a director is I think it's always amazing when someone's an extraordinary director when they're really young, because as I said before, the things that it requires of you are so diverse. Like from an organisational perspective is huge. From an aesthetic perspective, from being able to work with actors. And obviously everybody's got big strengths and weaknesses, but kind of comes down to knowing yourself, like knowing what those strengths and weaknesses are and knowing also what you want to say.
That I always think of the balance between chaos and control of being that. And it's true, you talk about gripping. You know the moment when you're holding too tight to something where it's all going to go wrong. I feel that on a set. I'm like, I'm holding too tight to my preconceived idea. How do I let go? Do you know? But I agree, you need so much preparation to be able to do that.
But then at the same time, if you just let actors feel free all the time or only listen to what's going on for them, then you can really stitch yourself as well. So it's a bit of a tightrope walk.
I think it's such a great subject, chaos and control, because you know, I feel like that's what I'm learning as a filmmaker, and my intention going into a third film that I want to do is about letting go of more of the preconceived ideas, still doing the homework, still having a plan. But for instance, not, you know, and I've never done this, but I've seen other people do, is telling a cinematographer how to set a shot. Or not waiting for actors to provide a possibly amazing solution to how to bring a scene to life. You can impose your will as a director. You have that right to do that. But why wouldn't you let someone else show you what could be more interesting first? It's one of the things I really like about Thomas is his openness to explore things beyond his plan. But I know that he always has a plan, you know, and so that's that margin between control and chaos, and good chaos.
That's the difference with the second film too, is that you've been through an edit and you know how much an edit defines the making of a film. So you can be free to let something go off and take another path, and in your brain you're going, I got that option, I could cut there, I could take that line and move that there, I could reorder this, I could put that there. You know, like you're already starting to put those things in place, and I think that gives you freedom. Ultimately, it's like process, and every individual's process is going to be really different. And the thing that I'm staggered by with cinema is that there is no way. There's no one way. There's your way, and that will be your way, and that'll be defined by your lived experience, the way you've navigated the events of your own life, how you particularly deal with people, you know, totally, obviously, your gender and your background, your response to the world, that's going to inform how you deal with situations and how you view things. But anything can work. Anything can work. If someone tells you that can't work, I just think those sorts of statements are really dangerous, really narrow-minded. If the principles are in place and there's a process guiding the way you're going to get there, you can kind of make film any way. And shots that people would say you can't cut from that shot to that shot. It's like you absolutely can, in the right hands and with the right principles. The rules are totally there for breaking, I think, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about your process. Let's step back to writing. Like, when you're writing, what does a day look like? Are you carding things? Are you outliners? Do you talk to other people, or do you burrow away on your own? Like, how do you guys work?
I only write if I really care about something, and it's the luxury of having a day job. And, you know, facetiously referring to my day job as being an actor. I don't like taking deadlines or being at the behest of somebody. So I write in seclusion on an idea that I'm passionate about. That
and you write fast.
I write very fast.
You write very fast.
With 2 fingers. I crow peck and I damage my computer and I can't look at the screen because I'm one of the old school. I can't spider type, like you needed to know that. And but what I do is I think about an idea for a very long time and I write reams of notebooks. I have like 2 of them here and I always carry them with me and think about it for months. And then when I'm ready, I just start spewing it out. And then I sit on it for weeks. And then the rewrite for me takes a longer time.
And you must just have drawers of stuff sitting there, because I said to you ages ago, I think the secret about you is that you're actually a conceptual artist. You're more of a conceptual artist than anything else in some way. It's like you talk to Joel, it's like the minute there's any downtime, it's like I got this idea over here and I got this, I got a spy drama set in Russia and I got a romantic comedy set in the outback and I've got what... I'm making up crap.
That's
but it's
not
just
true
like,
at all.
But it's like there's no romantic comedy in the outback. I was searching for an example.
But you got me thinking.
But it is just like, it's actually quite bizarre to listen to. It's like you run through this whole gamut of cinema, and it obviously comes back from the fact that you just really love the medium itself, and you're very connected to the experiences that I think you must have had watching film as a younger person into a really diverse array of films, and you're not pretentious about, I'm sort of heading in this direction. It's like, it's quite a liberated way of thinking about it. It's anything's fair game, you know?
And I just spew it out and then I come back and those things will only get written. I have a problem that I have a lot of half-formed ideas and they all go in drawers and in books and that stuff. And quite often I'll need a second part of an idea that creates a fusion that makes something worth happening. Like, for example, on The Gift, for a long time I wanted to write about the subject of bullying. And it wasn't until I had the second part of that thought, which was, well, what if I were to explore that within the context of characters my age, 20 years out of school, rather than at the nexus of the bullying events, which usually happen in school. And to me, that then became an exciting prospect. So, it's about instinct first and then intellect second in the rewrite.
Do you ever bring other people how did it work with you and David on The King? You were writing together. Do you sit in a room or?
We spent 2 weeks in Lombok, thanks to his partner who suggested that we go somewhere that wasn't rainy winter where we were and go on a holiday, and we spent 4 or 5 hours a day beating out the story or fashioning the script in a treatment sort of form, and then we went away and wrote separate sections, swapped and exchanged thoughts and rewrote things for each other and
you
collaborated that way.
You literally delegated like scenes though, right? Like he wrote a scene and then you would write the next scene and then you'd look at them and kind of...
And we would swap and then, there were times he sent me stuff and I was like, I don't want to even touch that. or I'd say I'd like to try a version of that. But he'd say, I want to write this chapter would be a series of scenes, and then I'd write a sequence. So, but I prefer to write in seclusion. I prefer to write on my own. I had a wonderful experience doing that, and David and I recently went through that process again, and I love that with him. But, you know, writing on your own feels fantastic and free, but then the next part of that is sharing it with people that you trust to tell you what's wrong with it, which, you know, I did during COVID with him because I trust that he's going to speak the truth, and I do it with David all the time. So I then send it out, ask for criticism, and then I go away and think about what's valuable to me and not.
I had the misfortune of writing my first film with one of the top newspaper editors in the country, who's an extraordinary journalist, but a total steel trap. And that just became, he literally said to me at the beginning of writing Acute Misfortune, why don't we set this up as a kind of competitive thing where, you know, you write a bit and I'll write a bit and we'll see who writes it better. And I was like, okay. Let's go.
No way.
We'll see who
ends up with a front page story.
But that's part of what the film became about, which is like, what's this learnt behaviour about these things that we decide to do? Like, what's the learnt behaviour of being a director? Like, yeah, I got a beard and a fucking hat and a nice collared shirt. Like, I'm a director. And he, you know, had these inherited sort of attitudes about how you work with people and how you talk about stuff. You know, the learnt attitudes of your profession, how you learn to be. Actually, so that became part of the substance of Acute Misfortune. That became the thing that we were discussing. But that was a really fraught process, really tough process. I mean, it was fantastic, but it was fucking tough. We had to get Christos Tsiolkas, the novelist, in at a late point, and Christos just sat with us and just mediated. Like, okay, yeah, well, you have that. Well, I don't agree. He should have that scene. Okay, great. Well, Eric gets that scene, and then I get this scene. Okay, great. And it was fine. It was never antagonistic, and we're very close friends. It was just the right toughness that was required for that piece of writing. And I knew I was directing it.
Could you imagine two people getting together and saying, we're going to paint a painting together? That to me is how complicated writing with a partner is, because it's an artistic expression, a story, but it's two people agreeing to tell a story together. It'd be like two people trying to tell the same joke at the same time in a pub, maybe. I don't know. It's going to be fraught. When he and I came together on this, it was a very... because, you know, with Unknown Man, I had initially had the intention of going, well, this maybe is something that I'll write and direct. And I saw Acute Misfortune, and without reading the screenplay, I mean, watching a movie is essentially one version of reading a screenplay. I saw a film that was about an artist and a journalist, and obviously it's about much more than that, but the tension and malevolence that was created between two men of those professions, it dawned on me, and happily so, and it's been proven since, that Thomas was going to write a far better screenplay of this material, and be able to handle and navigate essentially another movie about a relationship about two men far better than I was ever going to be able to do.
Tell us the idea of this film, The Unknown Man.
It's a really highly structured thriller about an operation that was run to catch someone responsible for a really terrible crime, and that's the substance of the film. It's a highly structured film, but at the same time it trades in a language between the very literal language of kind of thrillers and then a much more internal language of dreams and personal fears. Because what I was intrigued by writing a film about police, actually, which I would never have presumed to have gone toward, was the way that society provides these structures for us. And in fact, human beings, that's what we do. We create structures. Often we do them in story form, like religions. That's what separates us from every other species. It's the unique thing about us. And they're there, like religion, like the law, to protect us from the worst that we're capable of. So these systems that are in place so that when the absolute worst happens, these things, the gears lock and something bigger than us begins, like with something like a pandemic, you know, or the bushfires earlier this year, you know. These systems that are put in place by our society and to manage that kind of darkness and that capacity for violence that we fucking unfortunately have, which is just unfathomable to me, but constantly reiterates itself every fucking day and every week of human life, for those people that have to go and stand right next to that and be in the middle of that, the personal toll of that. Someone out there today is going to be walking along the road and get hit by a car, and someone, not us, will have to be the first person there. That's what the film became about.
It struck me thinking about the idea of an undercover cop and having to sit inside a life and lie for that long, you know, and the toll that, you know, carries. You know, there's so many cases like this around the world that you can kind of think of in this way, but did you find that you were researching a lot, talking to cops, or was it more somewhere else that you found this?
I said to Joel with this, I said at the very beginning, right, when we first sat down, I was like, I think the way this is going to work is that I'll do 6 months of full-time research until I am like fluent in this language, and then I'll start to write. And it's exactly what happened. I did 6 months of research, and then I wrote the first pass in 6 days. So I did 10 hours a day of reading and research. I locked myself in a little studio in Fitzroy in Melbourne. Because I'm very different in the way I work to you, which is like I'm absolutely tunnel vision, and my poor partner's here and will absolutely testify that it's just like, it's like a horse with blinkers on. I just can't even see anything outside of it. But that's how I had to work on this. I had to understand it almost in the way of a journalist or a professional in that profession, to understand it as much as I could before I could put pen to paper. I couldn't start to presume things until I had all that information. So just understanding about these sorts of cases, understanding about these sorts of situations, forming an opinion, and certainly carding absolutely everything. That dorky thing of putting up scene by scene, chapter by chapter, act by act, until it made some sense. And confronting the tough questions about it.
Once you've done that?
No, I would do that and then write it. I remember Jane Campion said to me when I said I was writing the first film that I was writing, she said, don't give me the first pass don't give me the first draft, give me the third draft. And what she meant was write it until you can't write anymore, until you don't have any answers left, until you're just like, oh, I'm cornered here, and then maybe it'll be something worth reading for other people. But if you're like, I'm going to fix that bit later, oh yeah, I know that those characters are a bit weird, but because when people read it, that's all they'll be able to focus on, is the things that aren't working.
Let's talk a little bit about set, because I'm aware we've kind of, you know, like, how do you guys, having come from acting, how do you work with actors? Do you rehearse, for instance?
I rehearsed a lot on The Gift, and I made a point of, I had these one-on-one long sessions with certain actors, the main actors, Jason Bateman and then Rebecca Hall, and one-on-one, and then I had sessions with them together where we'd just talk. Then I had the luxury of having the house that we were going to shoot 3/4 of the film in, and we then had a session all together for like 2 half days where we didn't necessarily rehearse scenes, or not all the scenes, but we walked through where they would exist in the house. And I had the luxury of doing that with my cinematographer hanging back in the shadows. And then he and I talked about what had happened in those few days, and we started making a plan. So it was sort of rehearsal for me and him. It was rehearsal with a camera, it was rehearsal for the actors. And it was a shorthand so that when we got there on the day, we could sort of crack along. But we never cooked the scenes up. We did a couple just because we weren't sure about the temperature of them, but we never overcooked anything. Boy Raised, I hardly had any rehearsal whatsoever.
Such big numbers.
Yeah, and you got. I guess there's sort of it's sort of true that maybe depending on the sort of weight or profile of an actor, you might not necessarily get access to them for very long. And that is okay, given that they have incredible experience and probably like their own way of just slipping into any stream that they're in. But it definitely helps as a director to have access, I think, because otherwise you're just sort of like landing there on the day going, all right, well, what are we going to do? I've had a look at this location, but these actors haven't walked around in it. What if what I think is not what he thinks, which often happens.
And just on a day-to-day basis, when you're a director and you know you've got the first AD and the producer's breathing down your neck and going, you've got 1 hour for this now. Do you know that? You've got 1 hour. You're like, okay. And the actors are like, can we just go over here and rehearse this a bit and run this? Sometimes those sorts of practical limitations are just going to force themselves onto what you're doing. Some actors don't like to rehearse too. Some like to rehearse a lot. It's tricky, isn't it?
Well, so much of it is about the work, your work as a director, and also the shared history between you. Because it's very hard to walk onto a set and feel like you're the newcomers, the director and the actors. It
was funny with us because Joel's obviously a producer on this film. Our conversations on this film go back 2 years. It's actually happened pretty quickly. It's less than 2 years to this point now, and we've got 8 days left of filming, something like that. So it's strange to be even doing this in the middle of shooting a film. It's really, something. But the same thing with Sean Harris, who's playing the co-lead in this. Sean's been attached for well over a year. My assistant, Charlie, who I brought on personally full-time, who's ended up, being the connection between me to all the heads of department and everybody when it gets too big, because it's just a huge film structurally. Those people at the core of it have all been there for such a long time, that actually there's already a big shorthand. There's already a big understanding. We already definitely laid the train tracks months and months and months ago. And then you're kind of refining it through discussion and then carrying out your plan.
And I do think rehearsal, a lot of people who haven't necessarily been on a lot of sets and even for a long time, my assumption that was the definition of rehearsal is, like rehearsing a play, that you're standing up and moving it and then getting it to a point where you're like, that's what we're going to do. To me, rehearsal, the more important aspect of rehearsal is that getting everybody on the same psychological or philosophical page about intention, about theme, about temperature or what a scene is about. So sometimes conversations are a better placeholder for the word rehearsal than an actual physical
Which is interesting
blueprint.
with someone like Sean, who will never want to have those conversations. Those conversations are like, he'll put his fingers in his ears because he wants to know.
He doesn't want to know about me, but he'll talk to you about him.
He will to an extent, but it's less going to be... It's more just going to be little tiny clarifications and trying to feed the smallest amount of information that you can, because with Sean it's like dropping a rock into a pool. One little thing just keeps going, and he trusts that as well. But he's from that school which I have profound respect for, which is just he's just absolutely within it. He's absolutely within it and protecting that reality, and needs that from you too to protect that reality.
It's so weird. Filmmaking to me is so weird because, if you're a surgeon and you're performing heart surgery and your team was with you, you'd know exactly what their qualifications were. You'd know exactly what their parameters of their job was, where they'd maybe been to university, how long they'd studied for, the way they operate and the tools they operate with. When you walk onto a set, you might be with someone who went to drama school and has worked for 15 years in theatre. They might be working with someone who's young, who's never been in a film before, which is an exciting prospect to a young man in the audience here. For me, is like, those qualifications don't necessarily, you're not really aware of those things. You might have a director that wants to do something one way and an actor who's like, that's not how I work. And yet you're all performing this sort of artistic surgery together.
And then the theatre actor will turn up and start milking the bejesus out of it and suddenly the scene's not working because the really experienced person is off the tracks. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that when you've got the producer going, you've got 15 minutes now to get this?
But I think the answer to all of this is conversations ahead of time. And someone asked me, a young PA in the car asked me the other day, Tom, he said, what if you get to set, like, and you're directing something and an actor doesn't want to do something? I said, well, you've got to have become aware of that ahead of time. You can't be on set and then have an actor go, hey, I don't agree with this scene. You got to talk about it. Like, why would you not talk about that ahead of time? And if they disagree with you and you have separate visions, if it's maybe about one scene, maybe you could negotiate. But if it's about the whole journey of a character, you got to say, look, as much as I love you, I can't work with you, and you probably can't work with me, so I'll go and find somebody else. So that's part of your planning as well, is just knowing that everybody's willing to play the same game in some form.
And that you have to lead them, even if they are more experienced than you as well, or like you have to listen to them as well. Kath's giving me one more. She's, oh God, I've got so many more.
Well, where are you got to be? What are you got to do?
Talk to me about working with other crew, like your director of photography, let's say. And
I mean, that's just one of the things that became really important to me on this film was because this film has 240 part scenes. That is colossal. The number of shots, the number of setups, the number of scenes that we shoot a day, the complexity of how those pieces interlink. I just knew I needed somebody who was going to be deeply on board from the very, very beginning and invest hugely and personally and give a lot of time. And to be honest, I probably could have got obsessed with going and hunting someone profoundly experienced who's done an enormous amount of stuff. And I was like, no, what I really value here is energy and access. And so Sam Chiplin, who's shooting this film, has just been a complete gift. I can't imagine anybody else shooting the film because he gave me over a year. So Sam's just shot Penguin Bloom, which is just about to come out, and he just shot Dirt Music, which has just come out. He's shot a number of major series with director Glendon Ivan. But this is the first really dark film that he dealt with, and I think the first point of connection for us was realising that I think Sam's sensibilities haven't been able to be unleashed on that side of storytelling. So that was exciting to him. That was something that he really wanted to go and bite into and be really bold with. I also needed someone who was going to embrace the limitations of the shoot. With that number of scenes, with the speed that we were going to shoot, you just can't, like we had a lot of phrases that we'd return to throughout the film, but one of them was, if in doubt, turn off a light. If in doubt, you'd kill that. We'd absolutely be single source in here. You'd be killing all the ambient light in here. You'd be taking the diffusion filters off this thing. You'd be creating strong directional light, and then we'd be working with shooting from backlit angles. That's what we would do in here immediately, because we wouldn't have the resources to just light like this. We don't have the time. So I needed someone who was really hungry, and I needed that duration of conversation to happen, and it's just been tremendous. It's that wonderful thing of like another half of your brain, and I think we have a very dynamic relationship. I don't know like what it's like to watch, but I'll say to him, no, don't do that. Pan down. He'll say, look, shit if I pan down. I'll be like, okay, good, go, go down, do it, or no, pan down. But it's very open. There's no conflict, and it's just best idea, best offer wins. And another thing that we returned to a lot was a Gordon Willis quote, which was, he said, I don't like options, I like choices. You got to make strong choices. It's better to make a dynamic choice with light and setting and use of location than to give yourself lots of options in the edit. Like, let's get the wide and then 3 sizes from one side and 3 sizes from the other. First of all, we don't have time for that kind of coverage. So then it became like, okay, if this scene was one shot, what would it be? Whose perspective is it? Who's being changed? Where's the currency of this scene? What's fundamentally on a story level changing here? And you'd really feel it from inside. It's like sometimes Joel's in a scene and we're barely on him. We'd be all on you. So we'd be here, we'd be talking, but it would be all about what's happening for you. So making those choices was really important for the two of us.
Amazing. Do you have that kind of shorthand quotes and like sayings between different people, or is it just specific to that relationship?
I didn't know what I was doing on the first one. I didn't know what that relationship required. I didn't know what it needed to be, how to set those terms or anything. I'm really proud of the photography in that first film. I have 2 DPs on that film, which was complex. But I really wanted this film to have a fluency through the whole thing. And so we really needed to, like I said before, decide on process and decide on principles, and then let them guide it, and then try to write a strong enough script that everybody knows it's like a steel scaffolding for a building. Like you can see that it works, and now you just need to find the perspective.
That's great. I think we're going to ask questions. We're going to go to the audience and see if anyone's got anything.
It's funny for us because you never talk like this. You don't sit around talking like this when you're at work. So it's a rare opportunity to kind of like
so my
think about what you're doing.
Actually, for you, Joel, is what on the gift. What was it like? How do you direct your first film and also be one of the leads? It's.
You have a look. I don't know how guys and girls that act and direct and star in their own film. When I mean star, I mean like a number one on the call sheet and are in every scene. And I don't know if maybe one day I'll try and do that. But in both of my films, I've been in probably about a quarter of the schedule on screen, and I much preferred the days where I was just directing, where I could turn up and sit behind the monitor and orchestrate everything rather than try and orchestrate something that I was also within. But the luxury that I had that made it all possible and didn't waste time and made it all the thing that made it possible was I had my brother, who's a director, on set, and we would get together the night before or on the way to set, and he would live with me during those weeks that I was shooting and acting, and he would pick my brain, or I would tell him what I wanted to achieve in the scenes, and then he would sit behind the monitor, and essentially he would watch me do my thing as an actor, and I wouldn't have to go back and watch myself. And the reason I couldn't do that is A, for time, but more importantly because when I watch playback as an actor, it can start to get inside my head too much and affect things. And I learned that from being on the set of Gatsby, where guys like Leo and Toby, who could objectify and had been around for much longer than I had and been working on movies since they were kids, could watch themselves and objectively sort of look at a playback, for example, and go, okay, now I know what I need to do for the next take. For me, I would go home at night and eat myself alive with paranoia about how bad an actor I was and how the scenes weren't going to cut together because I fucked the movie up. If I don't look at the monitor, I can sleep better at night. So that was the dilemma of directing myself, but Nash was there and he could look at me and go, great.
Did you watch rushes at night? Would you go home and review stuff? Or would you
I would look at it without sound because I realised that part of my self-consciousness is more about how I sound than how I look. And watching The Gift, strangely, I was able to edit that film without that self-consciousness because I was playing such a creepy character, and I had a look about me in that film that wasn't me, and it wasn't. This film is really interesting to me because there was something that I heard in my research by talking to a particular individual about undercover operatives not being actors, and I think talk about, research, research is important. That my perception before research was like undercover operatives must be actors. They must, and the opposite. I kept hearing the opposite and reading the opposite. It's like, we're not acting. They're not acting. They're just lying. They're lying about who they are and what their name is. Everything else is elements of truth. And so with The Gift, if I was stretching to play a character that was outside of myself, I realised that part of the challenge here was to try and be closer to myself than I have been in many years on film.
It was like a different version of you. And I talked to you a lot about things that I'd observed about you that I wondered whether you were really aware of them, or where they popped up for you, and when I'd seen them in you in different situations, and sort of almost drawing your attention to that. Like, what's that different, Joel? If that person had a slightly different life, if this person had a slightly different life, slightly different way of negotiating stuff, what would have come to the surface? What are those sort of strengths that you push down because of how you've decided to be as a person, which is generally extremely generous and caring?
Thomas was asking me to extrapolate on one element that he sees occasionally in me, where I'm not such an affably kind and accommodating and friendly person, and to make that the majority, the major kind of notes for the character, because I generally expend a lot of energy in my life making people feel okay. It's something I've learned from my mother. It's not genuine, but it takes a toll on you, when you spend a lot of time putting energy out to other people. So as much as Mark is very similar to me in lots of ways, the part that I have to struggle against is trying not to be friendly, trying not to be...
It genuinely hurt you for a while, I think. I felt really terrible for a little while because I was like, fuck, man, he's really such a nice guy.
Also
and
because of
this.
because of the tone and the culture that's created on set, where it's not a super jokey, chatty set. It's very shrouded in a kind of a different atmosphere. Is that I find myself being unavailable to a lot of the crew, and there's a contract there. They understand why, but all those conversations that I usually have before you roll up that actually do distract an actor, I've decided quite and happily lent into it, but it really hurt me in the beginning, and the whole film was sort of I think we'll all need a big shower and cry and a big sleep after it. Not to give it the sense of some deeper, mystical importance, but there's a residue to work, and then definitely with this, I think there's a residue of that. It's like putting on that armour that says you don't need to give a fuck about anybody else, and that doesn't sit comfortably with me.
So you won't be moving all the bags and everything for everyone else?
I won't be joining you for your fucking COVID-free chat, drink. Take that.
That is a really hard thing on set, though, isn't it?
I will. Of course I will. It's Sunday.
Like, I often think about this as a director, like protecting actors so that they feel like they can be comfortable with the crew, but also not have to do the bit where they're being nice all the time. Do you know?
I've always envied actors who I've judged at the same time with the other half of my brain. There's like the one that goes, get out of my eye line. Don't do this. I always go, there's a nicer way of doing that. For sure there is. Final touches and you're like, I really wish this wasn't happening right now, but I can't say anything because I'll offend the person. There's a nice way of doing that. I find myself allowing myself just like distracted by everything because I'm not wanting to be that person. I've admired actors who have done it because you realise that the audience that buys their ticket at Nova or at the UMC or whatever cinema you go to, they don't know whether you were fun on set. I don't know if you're a fun guy.
And it's hard to underestimate just what the impact of like, good morning, how you going, before a take can do to you. And it's not as if I was like, don't fucking talk to anybody or anything like that. It wasn't that sort of thing. It was just like protect yourself a bit more. We're not playing with, we're in a film like Sweet Country. That was really important. But there was a lot of non-actors on that set. There were kids on that set. There was it needed it needed an atmosphere where people were really looked after. And as an actor, I was absolutely prepared for that. And in fact, that became the DNA of it. It was like, be present. You have to be really present while making this thing. Whereas with this, it was like, we really have to enter into the fiction. We really have to honour the fiction. You know, but at the same time, I think it's also been quite a joyful film as it's gone along. At times.
Oh yeah, it's not like a horrible time at work. It's actually more the better for it. It's just different, you know.
Same as a director though, because I spent a lot of time being like, I don't want arseholes on my set, and I don't think I have to be rude to anybody and all of that. But there are moments where it's like, should I be a bit ruder? Because
yeah, and I
have to get what I need.
I'm
now,
the same, and I think
you know?
you've got to bring. That's the thing about bringing your principles to your work, is it also comes down to like, I can't stand bullying. I think the extension of bullying is fascism, and I don't tolerate it. I fucking hate bullies. It drives me nuts. But it's a professional environment. You are there to work, and you have a lot to get through. And you know, no one's going to be upset with you if the film's fucking great. If you had a really friendly film and it doesn't work, you know, it's like, well, you know, it just needs to be. It's a professional environment. There's a lot of money in film. It's not the same as a lot of other art forms either. You know, it's just you've got to look after one another, but you do need to really remain on task. I also think it's just too much to manage. I mean, I've lamented it to Rachel and other people before, though. I said I haven't even had a conversation with a lot of people in the crew on this thing, but it's just because I know what I can manage, and I can only manage this. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to close off a lot of doors about who you are as an individual just to keep that one open that matters right now, and wide open, so you've got full access, you know.
That's amazing. Is there other questions? We got caught up. There are a bunch. There's a couple down the front here.
Hiya. I had a question about kind of how budgetary restraints play into your creative process. Like, I know for a lot of us here who are writer-directors and we are working with absolute micro budgets, is that something that informs you during the kind of carding process, through the writing process? And is that, I guess my second part question is, have you been in a position like where, you know, from the writing stage to directing, you've had to make like big cuts? Or do you kind of get ahead of yourself in writing and go, that's just going to be too hard?
I think Thomas should talk to this. I'll give you one quick anecdote. The first movie that I was involved in making, feature film, my brother directed and I had written or co-written. And when I wrote the first draft of the script a few years before we got to make the film, and it was probably half of it was set at night, and 1/3 of it was set during a constant month of rain. And, you know, freedom of writing, you know, asteroid hits the earth. You can do anything when you're writing, but then when actual money starts coming into the equation, and as you're pointing out, like small amounts of money, you have to really look at, like, do we need that many driving scenes? How do we start to sort of pull the belt in on the grocery shopping? You know, what do we really need?
Yeah, and when do you put your foot down too and go, no, like, no, don't compromise on this, compromise elsewhere, pick your battles. We have to have this, you know. It's definitely a really, really tricky balance, and definitely it's there from the beginning. If it's not there from the beginning, you're in the wrong field.
I do think the big thing is also, like, you need to at least know that the money that you have partners well with the thing that you've written, and if it doesn't, that's a big problem. And but if it gets close, that's when the battles begin, because then you got to do what Thomas is talking about. But
funnily enough, the tension of cinema will always be, what do I want and what do I have? It's always like expectations versus reality. And juggling those two things, I think, is the job. I think that is the job, outside of the actual storytelling itself. I had a theatre company for years and years that I started when I was 22, which ended up making work with all the major companies and major festivals in Australia. And we didn't apply for a single grant for the first 6 years, because my philosophy was, anything that's going to slow us down should be got rid of. You just, if you've got $100, you make it for $100. You just do it. Because it's theatre. If you want to turn a man into a dog on film, it costs $40,000 in a VFX team. And, you know, if you want to do it on stage, you just drop to your knees. You know, it's like, it's a different medium, but film doesn't have that same thing. It becomes about the type of story you want to tell. There's obviously a great Adelaide filmmaker, Rolf de Heer, who's like, well, I want to make a movie, I got this much money, well, I'll set it in a room, you know. You've got to be able to find those limitations and find a way to make them work. But my first film, Acute Misfortune, was $1.2 million. And from the very beginning, I said it's going to be a 7-week shoot. It's got to be 7 weeks. And it just caused nightmare after nightmare after nightmare. And we just stripped things away and stripped things away and stripped things away. And eventually we got a 7-week shoot. It made the film work. But it became an incredibly skeleton crew, and the locations got shrunk down, and you know, the way you shot it got shrunk down. But every film's going to have that tension. If you're making a $100 million film, there's every chance you're going to need every dollar to make that $100 million film. If you're making $1 million film, you're going to need every dollar. You're always going to be under that same level of tension. Having said that, I did say the next film I write is going to have less scenes. 240 part scenes is wild. You just have to be so prepared to be able to shoot 7-8 scenes a day, and sometimes have an hour 15 minutes for some of those scenes. You've got to be really seriously prepared, and to take that time pressure off is the only thing that I'd probably try to do again. Yeah.
I'm quite interested in you just talking about the tone of the set, and I was wondering if is there something that you do to set that up at the beginning or at the beginning of a day? Is it like a pep talk or something, or does it just kind of happen by the way you and your heads of department work?
Goes back in time to who you get as heads of department, who you're working with as producers, the things that they value, because so much of it's preparation. By the time you're there on the day, it's done. You know what I mean? You know, I'm sure you've had the experience, and I've had the experience of being on aggressive sets with dispositions that you wouldn't want to be a part of and don't want to be around and that sort of thing. So you make a conscious choice, and it does come from the top down about the type of situation that you're trying to facilitate.
And it's on our film, a lot of it's about the needs of actors. I know that you know, Sean is, you know, he's an incredibly focused actor, and so the usual culture of kind of everybody cracking jokes and you know, a loud set is distracting to him, and in order to create an environment for him in particular, and for me, where we can focus on our work together, we just have everybody goes about their business in a pretty quiet fashion. Now, when we're off set, it probably changes to a different gear, but I think Thomas is right. It's like, I've been on sets where the actor at the top of the heap or whatever, number one on the call sheet, their behaviour just seems to filter down through the rest, so that, you know, belligerent behaviour then allows other people to feel like, captain's belligerent, it's okay to be belligerent. Or, you know, that person's so professional, it's like, I want to be like the captain, you know. Because I always look at the number one on the call sheet actor, whoever they are, they're like the captain of a team. They're not the coach, or they're not the manager of the team. They're playing on the field, and their conduct will, you know, permeate.
But so long as it's about the work, that's all that matters. If it's about personal bullshit, then you can absolutely go away. It's got to be about the work. And if someone has big requirements out of the work, then absolutely that should be embraced and should be encouraged. And I like a quiet set too. There's too much to manage without it. But I do think, you know, like again, just not, you know, just to talk about Sweet Country, there was a beautiful moment at the beginning of that film that I remember thinking, that's how I want to do it, where David Jowsey and Greer Simpkin, the producers on that, just stood up and just said, we're here because we've made a choice to be here. We could be doing any number of jobs anywhere in the world, you know. We could be working in offices, we could be doing that, but we're here. So let's do what we're here for, which is to form a family for this brief window of time that we're here and look after one another. And no matter how you go about doing that, that's the message you should be giving out to your team, because ultimately you want to be getting the best from everybody, which is the other thing, of course, about being a director, which is just how perceptive you can be about each of the individual people that you're working with and work out how to get the best from that particular person. But I think generally just establishing a set that's respectful and professional is the absolute first beginning.
I mean, so many folk here have arrived at directing through a particular trade, which can be a real comfort zone when you're moving into managing a feature, which encompasses so many things. Is there any personal work that you guys have had to do to not fall back into those safe places where you have to be a lot more mindful of everything else that's at play?
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing for me that's a big kind of heading in my brain about what I would do next if I made a movie, and I feel like each experience teaches you about the next, whether it's mistakes you've made or people you've met along the way and things you've learned from them, or things that you've done and you want to, continue to do. But one of the things that I realised is because I come from an acting background, and maybe this could be said of editors and writers as well, as that maybe that career that you had provides certain strengths for you that create blind spots in other areas. And for me, cinema to me is a bit of a blind spot. And when I mean cinema, it's like I'm paying more attention to words and performance than I am to those things that go beyond that. And so my blind spot, if you will, or things that I want to remind myself of, is what is that language that isn't words, and that language that isn't the communication between two people, but how can I open up a film to be what it really should be, which is cinema, and be a visual medium. So I'm constantly having to remind myself of that part of what I want to do, or that's the way I'm starting to think.
Yeah, trying to get every element to sing the same note, And for me, definitely 5 years ago, I knew nothing about photography. I knew absolutely nothing about it. And so literally stuff that was as fundamental for me as like buying a film camera and learning by process of trial and error in my own stupid long way, which is never reading a book or anything, but just doing it and spending too much money blowing rolls of film and doing all that stuff. But just to learn what lenses meant to me, fundamentally. That was a huge knowledge gap that I had, and I would like to think that I've developed a reasonable literacy now with not only the way that I want to shoot, but also understanding objectively how other filmmakers shoot and directors of photography work, and understand how what the implications that has. But you're absolutely trying to fill your knowledge gaps. I mean, I think that's what I was saying before about like that, knowing your weaknesses and then leaning into them,
Well, on that note, leaning into our weaknesses, Joel, Thomas, thank you so much for being here and talking so much. It was just brilliant to listen to everything they had to say, and we didn't talk heaps about this current film, but we're all so excited to see it when you finish.
It's too early. It's too early to talk too much about it.
Yeah.
Wait and see what it becomes.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to go out and have a drink in the courtyard, so we'll see you all out there.
And thanks so much, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you.